silence for grace by the Grand Prior, His Eminence Mario Francesco, Cardinal Pompedda.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ti preghiamo, o Signore, di voler benedire noi, naturalmente, radunati qui nel Tuo nome, ma in primo luogo vogliamo rivolgere il nostro pensiero a colei che regge le sorti di questa nazione, a colei che deve portare il peso del governo di questo Stato. Noi ti preghiamo, Signore, che dia a lei la luce sufficiente per conoscere le necessità del suo popolo, di questo Regno Unito, e dia la forza per poter mandare avanti i progetti che siano a beneficio non soltanto di queste popolazioni, ma dell'umanità intera. Ti ringraziamo, Signore, e ti preghiamo, sicuri che tu ci ascolterai, nel nome del Padre e del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo. Amen.
We have 32 countries. 6 of these belong to the United Kingdom. And within those 6, we have basically 2 groups of people. Unionists, who want to maintain the union with the United Kingdom, who are mostly Protestants. Nationalists, who want to see United Ireland, who are mostly Catholics. There is a middle ground represented by Lord Alderdice. But sometimes I feel he's fighting a losing battle because these are very entrenched positions. Nevertheless, the last few years, as the next speaker will probably tell you, peace has broken out. And I use that word because people get tired of violence. Now, the next speaker is the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And he has a very difficult job because to reconcile these differences is not easy. We have, for example, in Ireland, got 2 soccer teams, one for Northern Ireland and one for the Republic. But we've only 1 rugby team. We've always had 1 rugby team where unionists and nationals play together. And that's what we hope will happen in the future. Now, the next speaker, as I said, is the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. He is a unique gentleman because his grandparents came from Cork and I think from Waterford. But he himself was a Welshman. Today he became a member of our order. He was also made a Knight of St. Gregory by the Holy Father. And he is unique in that we've had many Secretaries of State, some loved, some hated. But he has a great quality. He's respected by both sides of the community. I don't know what you think of Tony Blair at this meeting, but who else but an Englishman would send a Welshman to make peace between 2 Irishmen? That is exactly the job of the next speaker, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Paul Murphy.
It's great to be with you this evening. It's, of course, the National Liberal Club. I've never been to a Liberal Club before, but there's always a first time. One of my predecessors as the Member of Parliament for my constituency in South Wales was somebody called Arthur Jenkins. His son became Roy Jenkins, Lord Jenkins of Hill Head. And he and I, towards the end of Lord Jenkins's life, since he died about a year ago now, became friends. We reminisced about our little village where we both came from. And I start by referring to a story about Roy, because it's a little bit about, like we've got this evening, a dinner. But the dinner wasn't in a great library like this. It was in the Castle Hotel in Merthyr Tydfil in South Wales. And he was addressing the Merthyr Tydfil constituency Labour Party. And Roy was known, as all of us from Abersacan are known, for our likeness for good food and good claret. Even though it's a small mining village, in the middle of South Wales. And as he was at this dinner, the waitress, Blodwyn, came up to Lord Jenkins and said, "Lord Jenkins, the starter is soup." And he didn't care for soup very much, and said, "Can I have some asparagus tips?" Blodwyn thought a little bit about this and went back to the chef in the Castle Hotel in Merthyr and said to the chef, "Lord Jenkins wants some asparagus tips." And so 5 minutes went and 10 minutes went, and eventually out she came and she said to Roy, "We haven't got none of them asparagus tips, Lord Jenkins, but we've got some Benson and Hedges if you'd like those." Maybe true, who knows? I can't really imagine Roy smoking Benson Hedges, to be honest, but it's good to be with you today for a number of reasons. First of all, because it's been a very distinguished and memorable day in the cathedral, of course, where I thought that the ceremony, which their eminences jointly presided over, and their Royal Highnesses as well, went extremely well. It was a day certainly for me to remember, and all of us who were privileged enough to be honoured today by the Constantinian order will remember it for all our days. It's very good to be with you this evening in this great banquet as well. And also, I think, to reflect on the purpose of the order. And Donal said that it's not just about giving awards to people, but it really is about trying to make life better for people in the world as well. And what particularly impresses me, and it impresses me because of the job that I hold, is that the endeavours and the efforts that are made to cross the faith and religious divides that we see in our troubled world is helped particularly by the work of this order. Whether we are talking about divisions within Christianity or divisions within mankind in terms of their religious denominations and their own faiths. And it's very good that the order can recognise not only those of us who belong to the Catholic Church, but those who belong to other Christian denominations, to the Muslim faith, and to the Jewish faith, and to those who have no faith at all, but who have a faith in humanity. And so I'm particularly pleased that I'm associated and now belong to an order which is so ecumenical in its very widest sense of that word. I'd like to thank Anthony Bailey for all the work that he has done in pursuing this great endeavour, and of course to His Royal Highness and to His Eminence for the work that they do on a great level throughout Europe and indeed beyond Europe. I'm particularly pleased too at the way in which the Fourth Spring Community Centre in Northern Ireland has been helped by the Constantinian order, because that centre crosses that divide in Northern Ireland to which obviously all of you are aware. And I know that John Alderdice, who was a very distinguished speaker, the very first speaker of our Parliament in Northern Ireland, was associated with the work of the order and of course was himself honoured last year. It is a very particularly important point in the history of Northern Ireland which we are referring to today. Because today we are about just under 2 weeks away from an election in Northern Ireland, which on November the 26th will elect a new parliament for that part of Ireland. We've had a few difficulties over the last couple of weeks, and we'll have a few more, I dare say, after November the 26th. And John and I, because I don't think there's anybody else in the room who will remember this, who were present on Good Friday 1998, when I was Mo Molan's deputy as what we call the talks minister in Northern Ireland, but because it's Ireland, I was actually the listening minister. And we were there on Good Friday 1998, and George Mitchell, the senator from the United States, eminently distinguished man who presided over our talks, when we concluded at about just after 5:30 on Good Friday 1998, and most of us were in tears, said that this was the beginning of our problems in Northern Ireland, not the end of them. By which he meant not, of course, the beginning of the Troubles, but beginnings of a bumpy road that we were to follow after 1998. I then, some months after that, was moved to another job. I went back to my own country, became Secretary of State for Wales, but I returned last year, just about a year ago now, to Northern Ireland as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And the road has been a bumpy one. The Assembly's been up and it's been down. There have been all sorts of difficulties. And in a fortnight's time, when we elect the new Parliament, you'll see the news and you'll see even more difficulties that face us. Negotiations, talks, people blaming each other for this and for that. And yet, if you look across the world and look at peace processes, remember that in Northern Ireland, although we have these difficulties, sometimes we have the odd crisis too, all the time the road is going forward, even though it's a little erratic from time to time. And I think all of us in this room, particularly those of you who are from Ireland, or who have connections with Ireland, or who simply want to know about Ireland and are interested in the fate of the Irish people, north and south, to reflect on how it has been for 30 years or more. I was a very young student at Oxford when the Troubles started, and for all of my adult life, the Troubles continued. And it's only a small place. It's 1.5 million people, not much bigger than the city of Birmingham. But in that place, in those 30 years, 3,600 people perished. 80% of those were from Northern Ireland. It was, in many respects, as near as we can get in modern times to a civil war within our own country. And many thousands more people died elsewhere, but at the same time, in Northern Ireland, 3,500 people out of a population of 1.5 million. Thousands of others were injured in all sorts of ways, psychological and physical. And there is hardly a family in Northern Ireland you can meet which hasn't been touched by 3 decades of horror and misery and death. And all of that in our own country. Had it happened in Kent or Yorkshire or Glamorgan, it would have been a different thing perhaps for those of us who live in Great Britain as opposed to Northern Ireland. But this happened in our own country. And to those of you who are Irish, on your own island. And I sometimes thought, were I to transform that figure back to Great Britain, which has a population of, what, 60 million or whatever it is, that would have meant that the 100,000 people, men, women and children, in my constituency in South Wales would have died. That's the measure of it. And yet now, in 2003, the world has changed. There has been a remarkable transformation in Northern Ireland since the Good Friday Agreement. Not because of governments, although governments have helped tremendously. And one thing that has been the great feature of the last number of years has been the enormously successful working relationship between the British government and the Irish government, between the Taoiseach and the Prime Minister, and between our ministers and Irish ministers. Never happened before. 10 years ago, relations between the two governments were very difficult. Now, you can't come back to that cigarette packet, you can't put a cigarette paper between ourselves and the Irish government in terms of wanting to move forward. And yet, the agreement in Northern Ireland ultimately was forged by the political leaders of Northern Ireland, because they represented people who knew that they'd had 30 years which they wanted to remove from their experience and to move forward. The women, particularly of Northern Ireland, played an enormously important role in moving the process on. And so it was that we had the agreement, we had the institutions, we had all the other things that went with it. But above all, we had a determination that we wanted peace, prosperity and stability instead of death, misery and poverty in Northern Ireland. Now, I'm not pretending for 1 second that there are not problems in that part of the world. Of course there are. There are pockets of deprivation which are uniquely bad. In the Shankill Road, for example, in West Belfast, there's still 60% unemployment. Only one young person in that part of that city will go to a grammar school. Only one young person there will go to university. And that is replicated in the Falls Road of West Belfast and in other parts too. But in the overall picture that we've now got in Northern Ireland, and even despite the difficulties that I will face between now and Christmas in trying to negotiate an agreement to get back into government, the world has changed. Unemployment in Northern Ireland now stands at 5%. That's the lowest unemployment figure for 30 years in Northern Ireland. There are now more people as tourists visiting Northern Ireland than live in Northern Ireland. And at one time, no one would go to that part of Ireland as a tourist. If you go to Northern Ireland today, there is vibrant new economy, biotechnology, computer factories, and all sorts of different types of diverse employment which has replaced the shipyards and the heavy industry that we had there. But perhaps above all else, if you go to the city centre of Belfast or the town centres of our towns in Northern Ireland, you can go and do your business in the same way, shopping, going to restaurants, going to the cinema, going to the theatre, going to the opera, in a way that you can do here in London, or back in Wales where I come from in Cardiff. You can't do that, couldn't have done that 10 years ago. Might seem ordinary to you and me, but if you'd gone to Belfast a decade ago, and if you'd gone to Marks and Spencer's to buy your clothes, you would have been searched as you entered. There were no restaurants there to go to, because people were afraid to go to those restaurants. The Europa Hotel was the most heavily bombed hotel in the world. But all that's changed. And people can live their lives in a way that they couldn't before. And above all else, last year we had in single figures, too many of course, but nevertheless in single figures, the number of people who perished because of terrorist activity. At the height of the Troubles, in the mid-70s, 500 people a year died in Northern Ireland. And so, although there are problems, remember that this is only a matter of a few months, over the last few months, that David Trimble of the Ulster Unionist Party and Gerry Adams of Sinn Féin, as an example, had 15 meetings, 2 of them where I live in Northern Ireland in Hillsborough, talking about the way forward. When I chaired some of those talks, as John will tell you, I couldn't even get them to talk to each other, for obvious reasons, because of the 30 years of troubles that we had faced. So the world has changed. It's changed because people have changed. They didn't want their children to go through all that. It's changed because of the help that organisations and orders like yourself have given to us. It's changed because heaven has been bombarded with prayer by Christians and others all over the world in order to achieve peace in Northern Ireland. And as an aside, I say to you too, that the leaders of the main Christian denominations in Northern Ireland, particularly Catholics, Anglicans, Presbyterians and Methodists, work together as one to end sectarianism and to move forward. And so there it is. It's been a strange sort of life for me over the last number of years, but it's been a very rewarding one, because so many people here in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, and across the world are behind us in supporting that peace process. On a slightly lighter note, I conclude by referring to another banquet. The banquet that I referred to was held many years ago by another Welshman. Some of you might remember from your history books who it was. He was the Colonial Secretary, a chap called Jimmy Thomas. He was from Newport, he was a railwayman. And he once presided over a great Foreign Office dinner. And next to him was the Chinese ambassador, who Jimmy Thomas thought didn't speak very good English. And so we turned after the first course, soup again, lots of soup in courses in state banquets, and he turned to the Chinese ambassador and said, after the first course, "Likey soupy?" To which the Chinese ambassador, inscrutable as ever, said absolutely nothing. The banquet went on, just like ours has done, and at the end, to the astonishment of Jimmy Thomas, the colonial secretary, up got the Chinese ambassador and made a speech in the most perfect English. After which he said to the colonial secretary, "Likey speechy?"